All right, welcome to Autodesk Developer Days. This is the specific overview for API updates related to the manufacturing products. So we're going to be covering Fusion 360, Vault, and Inventor. My name is Kevin Vandekar. I'm the manager over the manufacturing guys who work in our team. So they are supporting the manufacturing related product APIs through the ADN program. And before we get too far, just want to remind you that what you're going to be seeing is future facing information. So this presentation is going to contain details about products that will be coming in the future. And we just want to remind you that it's confidential information. So you're here through your Autodesk Developer Network NDA. And just know that what we talk about today, we cannot guarantee will be in the products. But we are very close to our release dates. So this is probably a very good update that you're going to receive today. So I'd just like to introduce our speakers. So first of all, we have Patrick Rainsbury from the Fusion 360 team. He's going to provide the API updates. He's a senior product manager for that team. We also have Konstantin Dianov, who is going to provide the Vault API updates. And he's a software engineer. And also have Chandra Shikhar, who's from my team. He's going to be providing our API updates for Inventor. He's a developer technical consultant. He's our Inventor expert. You've probably seen him in the Inventor customization forums, as well as gotten direct support from him. And then Sujit Subramanian is also a developer technical consultant. He works on my team. He's an expert in the Vault API and Fusion 360. He also supports Inventor. And so he's going to be helping us between speakers. So I'm going to turn it over to Patrick now. So let me just stop sharing. And Patrick, you're free to go ahead and take over.
Okay. No time like the present to add the last image to your slide. And then let me get going here. Whoops. I can't find all my Zoom buttons.
So what you're saying is you're going to be providing the absolute latest, greatest information.
Yes, exactly. Sorry, I thought there was like 10 minutes of intro. So here we go. I thought I still had tons of time.
Sorry for that.
All right. Let's turn the video on me as well. Okay, thanks so much. All right, I've got a bunch to cover, so I'm going to try to go fast. I think as soon as this presentation, I had this idea too that like as soon as this presentation's over, I'm just going to start a thread on the Fusion 360 API forum. I'll just start just a new topic that says feedback or something like that. And then that way, if there's even more questions that we don't get a chance to get to, or you just have comments or feedback and stuff, I'll just like start a forum thread and then everybody can just kind of pile into that afterwards as well. So keep an eye out for that right afterwards. I was kind of just thought of that. So I was going to put that on a slide in my next 10 minutes I thought I had, but I didn't get a chance to. So, okay. Let's go ahead and get started. Like I said, there's a lot to cover. I kind of had a lot of fun putting this presentation together over the last few couple days and stuff. End up, of course, getting a little crazy and pulling every single thing into a spreadsheet and making pivot tables and stuff to make sure I covered everything. But it was really kind of a fun exercise to just kind of see, how much the team's accomplished. I don't know if any of them are on the call, but it's like, I just can't emphasize enough, like how awesome it's been, spending the last year getting to be the product manager and working with the API team. Team's been just really firing on all cylinders, man. Like, man, I guess I'm not going to call out everybody's name, but it's been an awesome experience. Team has been knocking it out of the park. Some big enhancements, custom feature. It's been a huge thing for Fusion. for a long time, we've wanted that. CAM parameters, being able to create more CAM things, the first bit of exposing drawings, a bunch of stuff around just IDs and palettes and support for new features and all kinds of great stuff. So we'll get right into it. So I'm just going to kind of go through a bunch of things just one by one. And again, like I said, as far as questions go, I'm going to try to save like 10 minutes at the end of my time for questions, and then we can follow up in the forum. So, so active selection, this was something that was like pretty highly requested. And what this allows you to do is basically when there's no other commands active, so you're just sort of in a dead state in the UI, it actually means in Fusion's speak, that means that the selection command's active. And so there's an event now where you can respond to what's currently selected. And if anything in the UI changes, the selection changes, you can get a callback event that you can do stuff with. And that's also really important when we talk about palettes. So if anybody out there has been building, integrations into Fusion and has tried to use the palettes to basically build a HTML interface for your command or integration or whatever. Now, like even while your palette's up, you could be reacting to various changes of selection in the UI, and just kind of had that up as an example. I had this little script I put together. So this is a palette running in an add-in, and just really super simple HTML page. But you can see that so anytime I just have it set up where anytime I change what's selected here, I'm just getting a callback and just populating a list in the HTML page. But it's kind of fun, you can just pick all the different things, and all I'm doing is just displaying basically what the class type is. Sometimes it's really convenient when you're doing stuff, you're trying to figure out what something is or what a class name is or something. That's why I made this originally. But so you can kind of see what it is, like I picked the component, but you can see that actually Fusion, what I really picked was the occurrence, right? Because it's the representation. So anyways, this one little thing, this one kind of user interface event actually opens up a lot of different interesting things you can do in terms of creating like a more interactive experience. As far as palettes go, there's something I really wanted to call out, and I don't know, sometimes I think that it's kind of like if you missed something in one of our what's news in the API, it's like you might not even have ever caught this one. But so again, anybody who's been doing HTML or palette interfaces, up until about the middle of this year, we were using on Windows, it was a very, very old Chromium build, and on Mac, it was a very old WebKit was the thing that was in the underlying those. And then recently, we've upgraded a lot of the browsers inside of the rest of Fusion to a newer Chromium implementation. And so when you go to create a palette, there's this option. We haven't set it as total default yet, since we're all friends here, probably it's going to be just default. Then it'll be the only option at some point when we fully deprecate these two other things. But in the interim, it's actually a flag that you have to manually set. The default value is false. So if you set this to true, you'll get the new palette, and that just opens up a lot of other things for just modern, like it's just going to handle React better, everything else that didn't work in the old browsers. The other thing that's really new and was maybe like hard to catch in the documentation is that if you had up until just like maybe about the last release of Fusion, there was we didn't have a way to make caching available to the palettes, but we kind of built this other thing in just recently to enable caching. So, if you're presenting a website or something like that in the palette, and you want to be able to just leverage like a normal browser cache to cache a login token or something like that, or other cookies that you would expect to be able to have. There's now like basically your app is essentially sandboxed cache in Fusion's application directory. So now, any cookies that you dropped will be available like for your palette based on its ID and stuff. It's not even anything, you don't actually have to do anything here, but you can just now operate assuming that cache is supported, just like it would be in any normal browser. Another change in the palette, just really, we're thinking a bit, this idea of HTML interfaces and stuff, we're really putting a lot of effort there because we think it's, there's a lot more and more people trying to do stuff here. So there's another new event on the palettes called the navigation event. And this is pretty interesting. What it's really good for is if you, let's say again, you're hosting, the interface for the add-in is coming, from your website or something like that. And then there's like a case where, maybe on one of the pages in that, what's supposed to just be an interface to a Fusion command, you've got a link to like your privacy policy or careers page or something like that. And you want to basically be able to, redirect that link outside of Fusion to just the user's regular browser page. Or even if you just have like hyperlinks to places in your site that don't really make sense to be inside of a Fusion command dialog box, right? So now what you can do is basically, whenever there's a navigation event inside your palette, you can get this event, and then you can set this flag to true, and it'll just automatically launch it externally in the user's browser. And you can do that by basically inspecting the URL. So you could basically say, if it's outside of this subdomain, push it outside. And then you can also even say, like, if there's something, you can also use this to create like some kind of more interesting interactions where, like, clicking on a link that would be a navigation, you can actually just have that navigation come into this event handler, and you can process it in some way, like almost like the way you would, with the router or something like that. But then you can actually not navigate to it. You can just kind of like swallow the event and then do something yourself inside of Fusion. So just another kind of interesting way to create interaction in Fusion. A couple other little things like in the same vein. There's this, application execute text command. There's just a handful of little things where every once in a while, there's something that's kind of buried in a text command. So you can just fire those from within Fusion or from within your API script add-in. And then the last one is another big one if you're dealing with this idea of, embedded web pages. If anybody has tried to implement a workflow around, we have this thing we call like the Fusion 360 protocol handler, which allows you to do things like have a hyperlink that will open a file in Fusion. So like in the scenario, like where we have some partners that build, catalogs and things like that, where you want to basically be able to click on a model from the catalog and then have it just insert into the user's model. And you can do that by just formatting a link in a certain way. But there were some problems with like cross-domain security problems and stuff. So just in the formatting of that link, it now allows you to actually specify. Usually, it used to be that you would just say, F360 and then the command and then the path to the actual file that you wanted to open from some, bucket or whatever. Now you can just by adding, it doesn't affect existing ones, but if you add in your domain here, it will not fail, particularly when you're trying to do something like this from within a palette. There just ends up being, when you try to do that before, there ended up being a lot of like weird domain cross security problems, and was like this small thing actually opens up a lot of workflows. Yeah, I already feel like I'm running behind. So custom feature, this is my baby. This is my personal favorite thing. I've been wanting this since the first day I started using the Fusion API, and it was so exciting to see the progress so far this year. We're kind of still calling this, it's like the first time in the API, I think that we've called something preview, but we've got a sticky thread in the forum. If anybody's had a chance to like work with this, we've talked to a couple of people that are starting to play with it. There's still more that could be done, but the first iteration here, I think, is pretty exciting. Basically, it allows you to, before the custom command, you could kind of create a bunch of geometry, but then of course it would just end up being, you could create basically just like a group of features in the timeline. Now you can actually create a proper feature definition with its own proper parameters, and I'll kind of dig into it a little bit more. So Previously you could basically make a custom command, and this is a little bit of spaghetti, but I spent a lot of time trying to just figure out a good way to kind of like visually depict this, right? So you'd have a UI this is what you could do up previously, right? You could create an icon in the UI for your command. You could create an input dialog box to capture the so that would create this input dialog where you could capture some basic parameters. You could select some geometry, then it would execute. And then what you could basically do is create some features. And so in this case, I'm building this cage. It's like something for additive manufacturing. It's like a fixture for additive around these 3 parts. So then I could create that geometry and I could put it in a group. But then the problem was there was no real way to intelligently go back and edit that feature, right? There was no edit, there was no parameters. If the parts moved around, it wouldn't rebuild. And so now with custom feature, what you do, you create basically the definition of your custom feature, and then you have a couple of new things. One of them is that you now have you basically hook up to a compute event handler. That's not the right name, but you basically have an event handler for the compute. And what that means is that every time Fusion rebuilds the timeline, when it gets to your feature, you're going to get a callback that you can do your own reprocessing. So like in this case, if these parts moved around, I need to kind of reprocess, refigure out the size of the box, refigure out the number of instances in this like little cutout pattern and things like that. So basically you sort of interrupt the compute timeline and do your own processing at that exact moment. And you do that by you have set geometric dependencies, and you also defined your own parameters. And what that also means is that when the user looks inside of the parameters dialog box, they'll see in this print fixture part, cage 1, that's my feature, the first instance of my cage feature, and then the exact parameters that I've defined, right? So, and then even a user could just come in here and just adjust the bar width, which actually does a bunch of processing to figure out what all the new spacing needs to be, but they could just change the bar width, and then Fusion will recompute, and my handler will get the callback to do the compute. I'm assuming that this presentation is going to be shared. So I put a lot of slides like this in here where it's kind of just a bunch of references. I'm not going to go through these each individually. And I could probably spend, an hour just talking about custom feature itself. Yeah, or I'd probably get somebody else to do it even maybe. But the one thing I want to call out though is that when we do, one of the reasons why we're calling this preview is that the primary workflow that we've targeted here is that it is around the idea of base features. So in this case, it's like you would just really have like maybe like a sketch, and then I would build all this geometry using temporary BREP manager. And then maybe I would do a combine or something like that. So that's really the kind of the target workflow right now, is to sort of build the geometry itself using non-parametric features, and then you sort of add the parametricness, if you will, yourself. So there's this other new ability, which is that if I had created this body, so it's really actually one body created with the base feature, when I rebuild it, I'm essentially building a new one. And then I have this ability to say update body, which is essentially a replace in terms of references. So that way, if anything downstream was referencing that body, it would reassign the reference pointer so that it should then, even downstream features would rebuild. So kind of like this addition to base feature is a real big enhancement, especially around the rest of this custom feature stuff. And I know that does not do it justice at all. I would highly recommend, taking a look at this article. It's really, really comprehensive and really good. It gives a very long, detailed description. I think if you really read through this article in detail in the help manual, it's right in the top user manual. There's a new section called custom features. If you read through this, I think it gives a really good description of how to actually go in and start building one of these things, or even taking existing stuff. I know a lot of guys that have apps in the store. There's a lot of things in the Fusion App Store that would be even more amazing as custom features. So yeah. So going to try to go real fast now because I know I want to save some time for questions. This is another one, this is again around, getting really specific about creating geometry. But so if you have some more like sophisticated translation requirements and you're trying to kind of read sort of more like raw BREP geometry in, there's just now methods for basically every BREP type. So from bodies, edges, loops, wires, you can really just kind of construct BREP geometry just completely kind of like from scratch, right? And so you can, if you just have like the raw NURBS data, raw BREP data, you can just kind of assume most likely that's because you're translating from some other representation of that geometry. You can just kind of use this stuff to build it all the way up from scratch. And then a couple other new, just note BREP properties, just some properties on any BREP body, which is to be able to get its properties, but then be able to figure out if it's temporary or transient. That's really important when you start creating a bunch of stuff and you just want to be able to check whether or not it's actually been realized into the model or not. So some new and extended support. So just, in some features in Fusion, we're still not like fully wrapped with the API. So extended support or complete or new support for this list of features here. One of the big ones was chamfer. For example, the chamfer command itself got like a very big update and kind of like a complete redo of its UI. It's more aligned with the way the fillet command works. And so there's a bunch of new objects methods around the chamfer feature. And then what I would call like basic support for sheet metal features. So this is, you can see that they're there. You can find them in the timeline. You can find them in the model, but you can't create them and you can't edit them yet, unfortunately. And then the last little thing is just that you can actually force a compute of the timeline. So design compute all. This is especially important if you're doing something programmatically that's going to like, it's going to affect the timeline, but it kind of maybe doesn't naturally trigger a rebuild. You can just kind of force the design to rebuild. A bunch of new things in Sketch. So again, some new features in Sketch. So one of the things, this was like a long awaited, heavily requested item, which was text on path. I think there's probably like thousands of Fusion users that uninstalled, what's that tool? Inkscape. I can't remember. There was some free SVG tool I used to use all the time. And this was like my primary use case, was to put text on curves. So anyways, now you can do this in Fusion and in Fusion UI. And so then there's a bunch of new stuff in, I didn't put all the objects and methods in here, but there's quite a bit supporting this new text dialogue in the API. A couple other little things. When you do DXF import, you can force merge to a single sketch. That was something some people were requesting. This one's kind of interesting. So along the lines of the previous stuff with creating sort of raw BREP, you can also, if you have a NURBS curve definition, you can create essentially like a fixed spline. This is kind of like an interesting scenario. It's like if you've ever projected geometry in a sketch, you just get kind of like a fixed purple line. It's like the closest thing we have in Fusion to the equivalent of just like a raw curve. It's almost just like, it's like wire, right? It's just a fixed curve in space. And so you can essentially do that now in a sketch. So you can create this sketched fixed spline by NURBS curves. You can create just the raw definition of a NURBS curve and it'll just be fixed and it's not editable, which is, the key of this. And then with that, you can actually, on that object, if you do want to update the NURBS curve, like say programmatically or in a compute of a custom feature, you can use this replace geometry. So it'll, in the like naming and matching later on, it'll still be referenced correctly, but it will be updated by you, right? And then a couple other little things just to support some new things, the chamfers, and then center lines, another new sketch type. And then this sketch entity is linked. This property is available on basically every sketch entity. You can check the is linked property, which is useful to know. Linked meaning that it was, say, projected into the sketch or something like that. So you can figure out whether or not it's dependent sketch geometry, or maybe for dependent geometry, you don't want to do anything with it, for example. CAM API, this team as well has been firing on all cylinders this year. There's like so much cool stuff coming into the CAM world that was built with this API, but I will just leave that for another day. But they've been adding a ton. I try to capture some of the big things in this little diagram, but if you look at the kind of the breakdown in CAM, almost everything in that workspace can be kind of thought of as like this sort of nested hierarchy of from the workspace. You really have from the CAM object, you think about an API, you kind of go to setups. Setups have folders, folders have patterns, patterns have operations, and these are actually all derived from each other. They're all derived from the same base class, and so on all of these things, you'd have like this. In this case, you have like operations. You have these new things like item by operation ID, an operation ID. It's the same for folders and patterns and everything else. You'd have a pattern ID, patterns, pattern by ID. So you can just keep, if you're trying to keep an index in some other data model, you can keep track of everything. But then obviously the biggest, most interesting enhancement is from any operation, you can get its parameters object, which gives you the entire. So if you look at a camera operation, it's got, so many parameters in it. And rather than making like a named parameter for everything, it's really just like a bulk name value pair. So you're just going to get, for every parameter, you just have name and the expression of it, because also like all CAM parameters support equations, which is also amazing. So therefore you can say, let's say I wanted to change a step over, I could just get it, change the step over. That's pretty cool. And then also the other big enhancement in CAM API is on setups, folders, and patterns. Users can create what are called templates. And so before, you could never really create operations or create things in CAM. You could basically just like update them and then repost process, which was awesome. But now you can actually say, from a template, you can you either setups, folders, or patterns create from template, which basically allows you to just have predefined sets of operations that you can just apply to a model that you programmatically generated, for example. Just kind of like re-emphasizing, again, the read write of parameters, create from templates. Few other little enhancements like you can have custom graphics now in the CAM workspace. That's pretty awesome. That was new. Some support for additive. You can also have an easier way now to get this used to kind of be tricky actually. So now you can actually get back to like the design's root occurrence. You can get references to the flat pattern occurrences from CAM. And then there's also some new post properties you can set on the post processor. If you have a post processor that allows for input properties, then you can set those with this object here. You can also get reference to fixtures and stock solids from a setup. And then I just had like this quick example in here again with the parameters. So just basically being able to say, okay, setup parameters, job name, maybe I want to change that. Or I want to, get the step over. So you can see again here that the parameters are all just, it's all the same object type, and they just have an expression and a name. So I can do things like this. I'd say like parameters, item by name, step over, and then set the expression to some value. Data API, did a bunch of stuff here too. Try to make another one of these kind of fancy diagrams. So again, if you look in like the Fusion 360 data environment, it's really, you go from hub, projects, folders, files, file. One of the things that's new is that there was a couple of these had IDs on them. A couple of them had ID parameters that were wrong. But so we did a really comprehensive kind of audit of all of the IDs to match with Forge. So this is really all about using this with Forge. So, if you need to get a Forge lineage URN, if you're using the Forge APIs, that would be the ID of a data file. When you look at a data file in Fusion, you kind of have like the latest version by default, but then you can get a collection of its versions, and then you can you can iterate through its versions. So if you went back to an older version, you know, all versions of the same file have the same lineage, but then each one has a specific version ID. So for any data file, you can also get its version ID, which is the equivalent of its Forge version URN. And then all these ones up here, like they kind of have different ways that they represent the IDs for folders, projects, and hubs. And again, the ID parameter on all of these will give you back the appropriate Forge ID. And I just made this quick little app sample that kind of basically just shows you. I'm running way over, so I'm not going to open this up. I was going to, but that just gives you like every single piece of information about some data object that you can use in all of the different ways that you might want to use it, whether it's for Forge data management, whether it's for model derivative, whether it's for some other use case in the Forge API ecosystem, or you know, the Fusion 360 protocol handler. There's a million different things that you might want to use this for, all these IDs for. And so this was kind of like everything I could think of that you would need. And the other thing, this is probably, for some people, this has been the number1 enhancement request in the API for a long time, which was, you know, if you were building something, a lot of people I've seen in the API building things like kind of design automation workflows where you have, you know, kind of a set of standard parts, and then you want to kind of, you know, you're going to insert a whole bunch of brackets, but they're all based off the same base model, but each time you insert it, it's going to change it a little bit. So you always want that source model. And before, that was so challenging that kind of the recommended workflow a lot of times was to have some exported F3Ds like in your application directory or something like that. And now if you have the lineage ID in the user's hub, then from data find file by ID, you can just pass in that lineage ID, the data file ID, which is the Forge lineage URN. And then you can just immediately index to that data file. And so I bet there's at least a couple people on the call. If you've gotten this far with the data APIs, you're going to say, oh man, that is all I've ever needed. This is a big one, even though it seems trivial. It's actually that everything that is related to like library building, design automation based on like source parts, everything about having like seed parts for different workflows inside of a user's hub is all really opened up by this one function call right there. And then for any of these collections, so if you have a projects collection, you can get project item by ID and then pass in a project ID. So in any of the fixed collections, you can also use this ID, but the global search is really the big one. This is actually just in and of itself could probably be like I could probably spend 20 minutes on this slide, but I'm going to rip through it. Basically, two new kind of ID concepts here. One, so for any component, and if you think about a Fusion document, you know, you can have many components nested within a single file. And in Fusion's ID system, a component, when created, is given a unique ID and that is super persistent. So you can be confident that if you have a reference to the component, if you get a component ID, this new thing, then it will always point to that component, regardless of how it's changed. But what's interesting and of note is that if the user let's say a user does a file save as, right? Then the component ID does not change. So that means that like, even if a user did a file save as and you had some data model that was like attached to that assembly hierarchy, those component IDs don't change in the new file. So you either want that or you don't want that, right? So you can also just say that like for a given lineage, the combination of the data file ID and the component ID is always unique. But if you want to maintain a reference to the same part across two different files, then you can actually be guaranteed that the component ID will be the same across both files. The other new ID concept here is this entity token. This is really interesting. This is like, it kind of exposes like some underlying bits about how Fusion handles this naming and matching. And it's also how things, if you've used attributes before, work. And again, the nice thing here is that I don't have to, you could have done something similar to this with like writing attributes into models, which is what a lot of people did. You just write your own IDs, but that of course requires a model save to be persisted. In this case, you can get, for basically anything, you can get an entity token, and then that token is always guaranteed to reference back to the original face. Or for example, if this face was split, then that token would reference both faces that were split from before the split. So then now if I split this face, now my token will be referencing both of the faces that resulted from the split. But what you can't be guaranteed is that, you know, if the user makes a bunch of changes to the model, I might request an entity token on the same face, and the token might be different. So you can't really use it to say like, oh, I used to have this token, I just got one. Are they the same? Yes, it's the same face. That's not guaranteed, of course. But you can, if you get a token and you store it in your own data model, whatever, you can always use that token to get back to the source face. So with this design find entity by token, that's really important. And oh my God, I made it just on 45. So I think I only left like 5 minutes for questions, but that's okay. This is the last slide, I think. Drawing. So, you know, a big thing people have requested was, you know, has been, you know, an API for drawings. And while this is not yet comprehensive at all, you know, it really just, it's the first step, right? So at least now there is when you look at products, there is a product representation for drawings. So you can see that it's a drawing product. You can see that you're in the drawings workspace. So even, you know, for some people, guys that just want to put commands into the toolbar, you have like a much more consistent way to just know I'm in a drawing, I'm on the drawings workspace, I'm going to add a command to the drawings toolbars. I have a drawings product that I can, you know, for, you know, if you're getting the active product. And then we also, there's also a export manager now. And so really basically the one real, aside from just customizing the UI commands and things, the one big function by far the most requested drawings thing was the ability to export a PDF. So now if you wanted to do something like, you know, walk a project folder and export a PDF of every drawing, that is now available via the API. So another big enhancement. So that's it for me. I will stop. I think I didn't leave as much time for questions as I wanted to, but we'll go ahead and I think, is that what we're gonna do, Kevin? Just like open it up for questions?
Yeah, we can do Q&A now. And we do have a full 2 hours for
yeah,
the...
let's just keep...
Sorry.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah, so we do have 2 hours scheduled. So it's possible, you know, it's okay that you went a little long, so we can do some Q&A now.
Okay.
So you can ask in the question and answer panel, or if you want to, you know, verbally ask a question, just raise your hand and we'll look for you in the list here. Any questions?
Well, the good thing I didn't cut myself short to answer questions. Proceed. No questions.
No questions.
Okay.
Should we wait for a minute more? Give the attendees a time to think.
Also, I'm going to say is if you do go to the Fusion 360 API forum, I'm just going to start a forum post that if you guys want to follow up with questions later, I'll probably drop a couple links in there too, maybe. You can look for that maybe after this is over.
Yeah, that sounds great.
Yeah.
So why don't we go ahead and move on?
Sure. So next up is the Vault API. And to present, we have Konstantin from our Vault engineering team. So over to you, Konstantin.
Yeah, thank you. Let me share my screen.
Sure.
Can you see my screen?
Yes, we can see your screen.
Okay. So, hello, my name is Konstantin Dianov. I'm software engineer, and I'm working in Autodesk Vault team for 3 years already. So today I'm going to tell you about Vault 2022 API enhancements. So this presentation contains following topics. It is new Autodesk authentication service, authentication updates, admin service updates, and replication service updates, and also miscellaneous changes. Let's start from the new web service. Autodesk authentication service was added. It means that now the user can be signed in to the Vault using its Autodesk ID account, if this account was assigned to some Vault user. From the user standpoint, it will looks like we can see on the slide. So call of sign-in method will lead to Autodesk account sign-in dialog appearing to type the user credentials there. Here we can see methods of Autodesk authentication service. Those methods are similar to methods placed in other authentication services. So sign in to, sign in get license, sign in read only, yeah. And the latest one, it is sign in with license. To handle previous functionality, new member was added. It is out type Autodesk to support Autodesk ID sign-in. Okay, new web service section is done, so let's move to the updated web services. Session class was added. This is information about the session of the signed-in user. Session replaces security header class. To get session object in out service, get session method was added also. Also, Autodesk Vault 2022 Web Service API has improved to support for named user licensing. Anyone developing Vault application can explicitly provide an Autodesk Access token for purposes of login with a name to user license. To use this benefit, sign-in with license method was added to all authentication services. So it also was included into Autodesk out service that was created. And to handle previous functionality, new member was added. It is licensing agent token to support naming user licensing. The next topic is admin service updates. So in Vault 2022, friendly display names appeared. The user and group name no longer must be the same as the account name used during login. For example, Active Directory account name, which in some cases can be not friendly, like pcat or TQBC. So this makes it possible to use a friendly display name of your choice for either viewing of file history, etc. And here we can see the account class that will contain all not friendly data and will be assigned to the user profile. So the next is the definition of profile attribute. So every user and group profile now may have a set of profile attributes like company or country associated with them. First name and last name are now stored and assessed as profile attributes. And here we can see profile other class. So it is a profile attribute for a given user or group. So it is an instance of a profile attribute based on a profile attribute definition type for a specific user. So in the example, we can see that some user guest has profiles first name, last name, and test with some values. Previously, a given user could only support one authentication method, Active Directory or Vault native password. So in this release, a user can support multiple authentication methods, including support for the new Autodesk ID-based login as a third authentication method. So all user and group accounts are now stored in the user info and group info classes accordingly. Here we can see renamed properties. So is active for user and group classes were renamed to isAct. Next slide tells us about the type of the profile attribute definition is associated with. It is a flagged enum. So if you need to associate profile attribute definition with user and group, you need to combine enum values using OR operation. Here we can see methods provided for servicing profile attributes, and they are add profile attribute definition, update profile attribute definition, get profile attribute definitions, and delete profile attribute definition. And on the next slide, we can see profile attributes methods. So they are related to profile attributes for the specific user. So they are get profile attributes and set profile attribute order. And and also we can find change vault account password method. It was added as a replacement for the update password, and now it requires an old password. And here we can see on the slide where we can use it from the UI. Since user profile can have several accounts, to assign them to the user profile, we need to use following methods. Link Active Directory account to user, link Autodesk account to user, and link Vault account to user. So, and to assign Active Directory account to the group, we need to use link Active Directory account to group method. And here is the Vault client UI responsible for previous methods. So if you want to assign any account to the user from Vault UI, you need to go to add authentication account for some user and check some checkbox in this dialog. Next, for add group and add user methods removed out type param. Now it is determined by accounts assigned to user or group and added profile attribute and added to this method added profile attributes array that contains a set of attributes that we want to assign to the new user. For add user method, password, first name, and last name params were removed. As of now, user profile is like wrapper for the accounts like Vault account or Active Directory account. So we don't need password for the user. We need password for the user account. And first name and last name was moved to the default user profile attributes. And similar changes were made for update group info and update user info methods. Next are removed methods. So we can see methods that were replaced or removed. So update password was replaced by link vault account to user, because in link vault account to user we can set password for the specific user for vault account, and also we can use change vault account password to change password, but we need to provide an old password to change it. And also update user method was removed, and it is replaced by update user info method, because all necessary information we can update with update user info for now. The next topic is replication service updates. So the merge replication has been replaced with transactional replication. In merge replication, we had the concept of ownership of entities. This was introduced to deal with the data conflicts that arose as a result of simultaneous updates on the publisher and the subscribers. In transactional replication, the subscribers are read-only, and data modification happens only on the publisher. As a result, we don't require any transfer of ownership of entities between the publisher and subscribers, and the following API methods pertaining to the ownership transfer in merge replication have been removed. In transactional replication, subscribers are read-only, and all write calls on the subscribers are redirected to the publisher. In addition, all subsequent calls to the subscriber are routed to the publisher for a duration of 10 seconds to account for any replication log. This may not be a desired approach at all times, especially in batch operations like copy design. In such scenarios, we call the ignore replication log method to ignore any replication log from previous write operations and allow the calls to run on the subscriber. And the latest topic of my presentation is miscellaneous changes. So here we can see new properties that were added to different classes. And all service classes now have following three properties, like currently set session, redirected to, and session property. Yeah, so that's it from my side. So if you have any questions, please ask.
Yes, thank you, Konstantin. Any questions for Konstantin, please let us know. And in the meanwhile, we have a question for Patrick on the Fusion API. The question is there a way to use WPF in Fusion?
WPF? What is that?
Yes, WPF in Fusion.
What is WPF?
So I believe WPF.
Windows Presentation Foundation, I believe.
Yeah, exactly. It's typically a .NET component.
So.
I mean, so like anything like, you know, .NET wise, I mean, you really have to do it. If you have a way to like use that in conjunction directly with something with C++ into Fusion, but I mean, Fusion doesn't really have doesn't have a .NET API. It's not really .NET aware, I guess. I don't know. So, I mean, if you can build something like that that can then call into can be built with C++, I guess, or one of the other moves that we've seen, like where people want to build kind of like either a completely separate UI or even connecting to other software, is like basically using Fusion, building something that just does some kind of like communication, like enterprise communication between your app built with that. So if you want to build some .NET form builder thing or something, and then just have something that receives some kind of commands from that as like a listener in a thread and running in Fusion or something, but not natively. All the UI building in Fusion is done either through like the native command building or with these HTML palettes.
So another question on the Fusion API. Can custom features find and call each other? If not, do you have any plan to add this ability in the future?
Find and call each other. I'm not sure if I fully understand the question, or like the intended use case there.
Okay, so if I can find the gentleman. So I believe that's from Navid. So if you can could you just explain your question a little better? And in the meanwhile, I also have a question for Konstantin. So Konstantin, is there a new API for Vault design similar? Currently, it's very limited, is what the question says.
I'm not sure that I understand this question correctly.
Okay.
So,
Okay,
what is Vault design? Maybe.
Okay. So let me get back to the member. In the meanwhile, so okay, so we have the follow-up question for Patrick. Let's finish this one first. So to continue the custom features find and call each other, that's for implementing a system of custom features to interact with each other, is what our audience member means.
I guess I just, feel free to like follow up with me over like email or whatever. Okay. And maybe we just like chat real quick to understand better. We're really trying to get feedback on what people are looking to do with it. I'm thinking the answer to your question already probably is no. And I could explain some of the nuances of the way that Fusion does parametric compute. It's a little different than Inventor. So my first inclination is probably no, but I'd love to just like have a chat with you if you want to send me an email, and maybe we could just talk through like what your use case would be a little bit more, because we're trying to really gather up. It's so new right now that we're trying to get some people who are looking at it early, and what other use cases people want, and see like what other directions we can go to improve it. So I think this is probably more of a conversation that's going to take too long to do in front of everyone, right?
Yeah. Cool. Thanks, Patrick. And coming back to Ivan. Okay, now he says, so Konstantin, by Vault design similar, he meant duplicate search. So is there a new API for duplicate search is the question. Currently, it is limited.
Yeah, new API for duplicate search wasn't added. So for now, I think it is like it is. Maybe it will be added next release. I'm not sure.
Okay. So Ivan, does that?
Thank you.
Yeah. Thanks, Konstantin. Ivan, does that answer your question? Okay. Any more questions before we move on to the next presentation? Any questions?
Okay, so I will stop share my screen.
Sure. Thanks, Konstantin.
Thank you.
So if there are no questions, we can now move on to the Inventor API, which will be presented by my colleague, Chandra. Over to you, Chandra.
Thanks. Yeah, thanks, Ajit. Thanks to both the speakers. It was great presentations on Vault and Fusion 360. Now let us start my presentation on Inventor. Okay, looks good, I believe. Hi to everyone. Welcome to Devdays Online on Inventor. Myself, Chandrasekhar Ji, working as a developer technical consultant since 5 years. Today, we are here to talk about what's new in Inventor 2022 API. So in Inventor 2022, there are huge enhancements are incorporated compared to last release. As we can see, majorly there are 23 new objects are introduced with 199 new functions. That's really good number. And there are 172 new functions are created on existing objects. So we'll go through one by one. So broadly, now this presentation will broadly classified into 4 categories. One is to part document APIs, drawing document APIs, assembly document APIs, and rest is generic APIs. Now, these are the APIs which comes under part documents APIs and drawing document APIs. Similarly, we have assembly document APIs and generic APIs. So we see more number of changes or enhancements in generic APIs. We'll go through one by one. We'll start with the model state object. It is very, very important because it is a major change in Inventor 2022 because older days, you developer used to call it as a level of detail representation object. Now it is completely replaced by model state object. So whatever you used to do, the same thing can be done with the model state API. So again, it is allowed to do it for both assembly and part documents. So as I said, we are adding all the level of detail representation related APIs. So request to most of the APIs can be migrated to work with the model state. The level of detail representation related APIs can still work in most cases as before, but in some cases, there are behavior changes. A typical change is substitute level of detail representation, which will have its own document object instead of sharing the same document object with other level of detail of representation objects. Now we are highly recommend to migrate the level of detail representation object to model state for your add-ins, which deal with the level of detail representation APIs. So in application options, objects, 2 new APIs are exposed to support prompt to save and default conditions on updating model state. So using these 2 APIs, we can set whether to prompt to save yes or no, or default condition to default to save or don't save. So again, in reorder API, it is extended to support model state nodes as well, but master model state node cannot be reordered. So each substitute part is, we are hiding this for this time because UI removes this command from the context menu. So this property will always return false. In drawing view, in order to get the hidden lane status, there are two APIs are added, like get hidden lane status and set hidden lane status, which allows us to give get and set the status of the hidden lines in drawn view. This is very interesting because earlier virtual components are not included to support suppress or unsuppress the virtual components. Now in this release, virtual components are supported by suppress and unsuppress methods of component occurrence. So here, component occurrence proxy, we are not supporting to suppress, but if it is suppressed, unsuppressed method can work with that component occurrence proxy. Yeah, this is very interesting one. I think many people are looking for this API because developer wants to include 3D annotations, 3D dimensions from model to drawing wave. So here we have an API for that. So along with this, while adding base view, you can add in additional options. You can mention whether to include 3D annotations or not. So these two APIs, allows us to query and edit the hatches of the drawing view. This is very interesting API because without opening the document, we can access the I properties of the document. It is, in simple way, we can say that in cell extension, you can access the part or assembly documents I properties. So reference missing will return false when the reference is suppressed. I mean, earlier we had a conflict that when the component is suppressed, but still it was returning true. Now you make sure that it returns false when the reference is suppressed. So and the reference file will return a valid file object if and only if the file is available on the disk. Our new report Revit Exports API supports to export the Inventor model to Revit format. I mean .rvt format. Now there are two methods like suppress and unsuppress methods are included or added to the occurrence pattern in order to suppress or unsuppress the occurrence pattern. Along with that, there is one more property called suppressed, which gives the status of the suppress of the occurrence pattern. Yeah, this is also very interesting because developer used to used to go back to the document in order to get the I properties of the occurrence. So now we have enabled one is property, another one is a method object, where on one is to enable the property sets, another one is to get the property objects so that you can edit the occurrence instance properties. But now the same occurrence property sets, it is not supported for component occurrence proxy. So this view tab and view tab group support to move the views between the different view frames. The new client's resource map API allows user to set a list of client resources for browser pane for different themes. So these two APIs allows us to query and set the docking state of browser pane and dockable window. This is very important because import application options, export application options, which will support us to import the applications options and export the application options. Along with this, we have two other APIs which are which can set to use the AutoCAD related settings and Inventor settings. Yeah, it's very important announcements from Inventor 2022. Now in Inventor 22, what is happening, the register add-ins are not listed in the Inventor add-ins manager dialog as default. What I mean to say that the register add-ins will not be listed in add-in managers. If it is not listed, means it will not be loaded into the Inventor. So the register free add-ins mechanism already we introduced into Inventor 2010. So it is recommended to convert all register add-ins into register free add-ins. In case if you are not able to convert, if you have any problems in converting the register add-ins into register free add-ins, you can modify the registry key called load register based add-ins. If you modify that, the register add-ins will be loaded into the add-in managers of Inventor 2022. So as we discussed last year, the Inventor engine was introduced to force design automation. With this service, you can send automation jobs to performed in the cloud. This allows you to create configurator, parts catalogs, or simply automate common jobs. Not only does it allow you to create and modify the Inventor files, but you can also support other formats that Inventor works with. This service could allow you to create online portal to work with your parts or to free up local Inventor license to do automation jobs in the clouds. On a note, what I mean to say is that we are moving the Inventor repetitive work to cloud using force design automation, where we have an Inventor engine in for design automation. So over the past year, we have created many Inventor samples, design automation samples. Here we have 4 sample collections. We also listed the samples. You can go through it. Any questions?
Yeah, thank you, Chandra. So any questions for Chandra, for any of our speakers? Any questions? So we have a question that says Visual Studio / .NET requirements. So do you mean that for the Inventor API?
Shortly,
Yes.
yeah, shortly we'll be, we'll be creating a simple blog to display the system requirements for Inventor 2022. In that, all the specifications will be mentioned.
Yes. And just to add to that, Inventor has a very easy inbuilt editor, VBA editor as well. So in case you want to quickly test your APIs, you can use the inbuilt VBA editor. So yes, any questions? Any questions? So just to remind you all again, we will be posting this recording to the ADN portal. And also, once the press embargo is released, we will be posting this recording also on YouTube. So any questions for any of our speakers? So I have a quick question from our members. So an iLogic question, will we get named entities in assemblies?
Name entities in assembly. Have to get back to you.
Okay.
It is already introduced in 2021, but named entities it was used for naming the faces in 2021. Now I need to think in assembly. I never come across assembly. Hopefully it will be, but not sure.
Okay. So feel free to post this on the customization forum and we can get back to you with an answer.
Sure. Please do that.
Okay. So a question for Constantine. The question says, I would be curious if one could sign into Vault without having a Vault client installed using the API. Well, I can also answer this, but Constantine, do you want to take this one?
Yes, sure. If you have some Vault add-in, let's say, without Vault client installed, you will be able to sign in to Vault using Vault account. But if you want to use Autodesk ID, you need to have Vault client installed because you need to have a DSSO service on your machine, and it will be installed with Vault client. Yeah.
Thank you, Constantine. So Nicholas, does that answer your question? So any more questions? Yes, so we seem to have a follow-up question from Nicholas. Okay, so Nicholas has a follow-up question that says, currently there is a need to have the ADSK licensing available, and the VDF login requires a Vault client to be installed on the same machine. Am I wrong here?
Yeah, it depends. I see we have several sign-in methods with sign-in with license, sign-in with sign-in get license, and simple sign-in. So for just sign-in, you should have, I think, you should have a DSK licensing, so you can get it with Vault client. But for sign-in get license and sign-in with license, I think you for sign-in with license, you also need Vault client because, as I said before, you need ADSSO service on your machine, and it will be installed with Vault client. But with for sign-in get license, I suppose you will get license from server. So I think you shouldn't have Vault client on your machine.
Yes. So, so Nicholas, you do have the option of using a server-side license. So in that case, you do not require the Vault client to be installed on the same machine. The license is obtained server-side. Yeah. Cool. Yeah. Thank you, Konstantin.
Sure.
Any more questions before we proceed to conclude here? Okay, so we have a question with the annotation API feature. Does this work as well with sub assemblies? So I believe this is for Chandra.
Yeah, of course it will work. I mean, he is talking about 3D annotations, I believe. It will
Yes,
work.
okay. Yes, so Thomas, the answer is yes. The 3D annotation API feature will work as well as sub assemblies too.
Otherwise, one more thing is that you can mention while including the 3D annotations. There is we can send subassembly as a component occurrence proxy. With that, you can call the 3D annotations.
Okay. So we have another question. is multi-threaded access to the API possible? But could you clarify for
I think
which?
it is related to Inventor API.
Okay.
Answer is no.
Okay. So for the Inventor API, multi-threading access is not possible.
Not possible.
Okay. Okay, so we have one more question, this time for Fusion. Uh, isn't it possible that developers have access to new update of Fusion a few days before release for testing their add-ins? Like,
Yes,
okay,
actually,
okay.
we just started something where we found this way to do it. Like, it give you about a week, or maybe like 5 days or something like that. If you send me an email, I can get you added to that program. We're just barely starting to roll it out. We just got like a few people in it so far, but if somebody needs that on this call right now, definitely anybody here is more than welcome. So just I think my email is probably in this calendar invite or something, right? Or we're sharing contact information with everybody some way better than me saying it out loud. But it's basically my first name dot last name at Autodesk, right? Like everybody. So, but if you send me an email, I will see if I can get you added. I'll get you added to this little program we have for rolling out the update a few days early.
Cool. Thanks, Patrick. And does that answer your question, Naveed? So I guess that's all the questions that we have. Should we conclude? Anything to add, speakers, Kevin?
No, just want to say thanks to all of our speakers today, and thanks for joining us, and look forward to these new releases.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks to everyone for joining us.
Thanks, everyone. Have a nice day. Bye-bye.
Sorry, do
Thank you.
Oh, never mind. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Okay,
Thank you, everyone.
I'm gonna stop recording now.
Sure.
Bye.